So good evening to you again, everybody. It's lovely to be with you for our third night. If you've been to the other two, I salute you. Fancy coming back again. Each evening I've tried to say just a little bit of brief introduction about my wife and myself. We've served the Lord in Wales, had a missionary call really, because we're English by birth, a missionary call to Wales, and have served in 3 parishes over a space of 44 salaried years, and then some extra on top of that. I was rector of Aberystwyth for 25 years and was persuaded to write a book about those 25 years. You'll find it on the bookstall at the back. It's called Recovering His Reputation. If you think that you're in ministry, that you have made mistakes such as nobody else has ever made before, you must read my book, because I can tell you whatever you've done, I've made much, much worse. And one more thing about the book. There are many things within it that embarrass me. I had the courage finally to write them, but the things that really embarrass me are not there. So what you see there, I've done much, much worse than what's in the book. Letter to the Times, not so long ago. I remember my father looking over my shoulder as I toiled at my algebra homework. "Let me help you with those quadratic equations," he said. "It's only fair. I helped your brother with the same exercises a few years ago." His offer was greatly accepted, but the next day when I handed in my homework, the teacher glanced at my exercise book and said, "Your father still doesn't understand quadratic equations." So this evening we're going to look at a third parable of Jesus. I was asked whether these were in any particular order, and I don't think really that they are. Certainly they're not in the order that Jesus told them. But dare I say it this evening, this is my very, very favorite parable of them all. And I hope that I'll be able to explain why and perhaps help you to share my enthusiasm for it. Because this parable that we've already had read tells us of a God of compassion. The title in my Bible says that this is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Now, to be honest, I think we could do much better than that, because this is not the parable of the workers in the vineyard. This is the parable of a compassionate employer. The whole focus of the story is not on the workers, it's on the employer. He's the one who surprises us completely as the story unfolds. Just remember from our first night, the adventures of Tigger Moo. So that's my story, and I make it up. I choose what goes into it, I choose its direction, I choose its moral, I choose the way in which it finishes. This is a parable of Jesus. He is choosing the subject, he's choosing the direction, he's choosing the purpose that he's told it, and he chooses the way that it ends. And in this story, it is the owner of the vineyard who surprises us enormously. Everybody else behaves entirely predictably, and they behave to type. The servants that he's got that are organizing the vineyard and the workmen that come to work for him, they all behave to type. It is the employer that surprises us. What's happening? Well, what was happening was something that you could still see 2,000 years later happening all over the world. Workmen standing in the town square at the beginning of the day, waiting to be employed on a day work basis. They've got the tools of their trade with them, and so it's very easy for you to identify the carpenter from the stonemason and the painter from the plasterer. I've seen it in a number of cities with my own eyes. Every time I've seen it, I've wanted to do something about it. Because as far as I could see, watching those men just standing, hands in pockets, tools by their feet, waiting and waiting and waiting, I felt how dehumanizing that was. Waiting for work, wanting to work, desperate for work, but nobody has yet hired them. A precarious way to live. And this is perfectly normal for millions of people today, as it was perfectly normal in the time of Jesus. Now, so his hearers are immediately drawn into the story by something with which they are familiar. There is only one thing about the story at the beginning that is perhaps unusual, and that is that the owner of the vineyard himself goes out looking for his workers. He's got other managers and supervisors that he pays, but he chooses to do this task himself. So here he is on the street at 6 o'clock in the morning. He finds men already there waiting for work. He hires them on the current national living wage, a denarius a day. 12 hours work, 6 to 6, 1 denarius. And no one argues, because it's a fair salary. That's the going rate. But then something happens that is very odd later on in the day. 9 o'clock comes, and the owner of the vineyard goes back again to the marketplace. And he finds there that there are still some men who have not yet been employed, and he offers to take some of them on. He doesn't agree a contract price with them, but he simply tells them that he'll pay them whatever is right. It's there in verse 4. But then he does precisely the same thing 3 hours later at midday. Goes out again, sees that there are still some men standing there that have not been employed by anybody else, and so he gathers them together. He does the same thing again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then again he goes out at 5 o'clock with only 1 hour left of the working day. What's going on? The employer goes back and back during the day to see if anybody has hired the men who are still standing around and needing work. And they have not. The owner of the vineyard is concerned for the men. So he takes on more. He does it 5 times during the day, and this is the reason. He doesn't want them to help him. He wants to help them. The work would have gone on fine with the men that he took on at the beginning of the day. He could have kept them on the following day, and the work could have been completed. He doesn't want the help of the men on the street. He wants to give the men on the street his help. He wants to give them dignity. He wants to give them a wage. He wants to give them sufficient money to go home and feed their families for another day, because those who are working on a day-paid basis like this are desperate for the money. No work, no food, and the family goes to bed hungry. And this man is concerned for those workers. Now, Jesus in this parable is not telling us how to run a financially successful business. He's not trying to give us a masterclass on how to organize the national economy. He's not bringing us the counsel of Martin Lewis, money-saving expert. But what Jesus is doing is giving us a picture of the character of God. Compassionate, caring, generous, gracious. Repeatedly in the New Testament, we read of Jesus that he had compassion upon people. So the first thing that this parable that Jesus made up and told gives us a lesson about the character of God. Compassionate. But it tells us more than that about God. It tells us that he is a God of double grace. Because what happens next is extraordinary and again completely unpredictable. If it was a surprise that the owner had gone out to do the hiring himself, it's still more surprising what happens at the end of the day. It's not only that it is unpredictable, but it is extremely unwise. It's 6 p.m. The owner gives instruction to his servants that the men are to be paid off for their work, and he specifically instructs that the men are to be paid in reverse order. Verse 8, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. Those who worked for 1 hour are to be paid first, and then those who worked for 3 hours, and then those who worked for 6 hours, and then those who worked for 9 hours, and then those who worked all day. Now, come on. You're asking for trouble. And it is about to come his way. Could he not see in advance the issues that were likely to arise? First of all, the people that had been working all day say, well, why are you paying them first? We've been here 12 hours. But then he makes it much worse. If the owner had wanted to save himself trouble on this particular day, what he should have done was to pay those who had been working for 12 hours and say, thank you, boys, go home. And then he could do what he wanted. They would have gone home entirely satisfied, grateful for having had a day's work. But instead of that, he makes trouble for himself, and he makes it much, much worse than it already was. So here they are, the men, they finished the day's work, and they're called forward. You that came and joined us at 5 o'clock, will you come and collect your wages? And there it is, it's a denarius apiece, the national living wage for a day's work. And those who've worked all day are standing there. They're watching, they've seen what's happening, and they say to themselves, gracious. When he took us on this morning, we thought he said that we were being paid a denarius a day. What he really meant was we're going to be paid a denarius an hour. That's obvious. Here are the men who they've only been working an hour, they've had a denarius. It must be 12. This is the best day we've ever had in our lives. 12 denarius for a day's work. And then the ones who've been working for 3 hours are called forward. Come on, gentlemen, will you come and present yourselves? And they get a denarius too, for 3 hours. And the men who've worked for 12 hours say to themselves, can't quite work this out. Is it a denarius for 3 hours? If it is, then that means that we're going to get 4, not 12. It's not as good as we hoped, but much better than we usually get, so we'll be more than satisfied with that if that's what we get. But then it gets worse. Because those who were hired at midday, they're called forward. Come on, lads, come on, collect your wages. And they get a denarius apiece. And those who've been working for 12 hours, they're still looking on, they're gawping at what takes place. They scratch their heads and they say, well, okay, well, if that's the going rate, it means that we're going to get 2 denarii for the day. That's double what we normally get, and I suppose we'll go home satisfied. And then those who've been working from 9 a.m., they get a denarius apiece as well. And by this time, the boys that have been working all day are saying to one another, does this man know anything about justice? Does he know anything about fairness? Does he know anything about equality? We've been working for 12 hours. The lads that work for 9, the lads that work for 6, the lads that work for 3, and the lads that only work for 1 get exactly the same as we got. That is completely unjust. It isn't right. A denarius for an hour? That's unfair on us. Couldn't the owner of the vineyard have seen it coming if he'd done it that way? And this is Jesus' story, remember? Why on earth did he pay the men off in that way? He laid himself wide open to a substantial part of his workforce, going home totally discontented with him as with a boss. It is unjust, it is unfair, and it's simply wrong. But wait a minute. What they just said is completely untrue. There isn't any injustice here at all. There's no underpayment. The agreement with the men at the beginning of the day was that he would pay them a denarius, and that's what he paid them. There's no underpayment for anybody. There's no cheating here. He doesn't underpay anybody. He chooses to overpay some of the others. And the complaint comes from the justly paid, listen, who cannot tolerate grace. That's their complaint. They cannot tolerate grace. Grace, compassion, goodness, generosity is what flows from the heart of God. And that is what Jesus puts on display here. He puts it on display to such an extent that the owner displays it. And as we see what the owner does, we wonder. See, grace and compassion and goodness and the generosity of God is what all of us are dependent upon. And the Master wants to ensure that you and I know what is in his heart. He wants to know that everyone gets an insight into his character. And this is his character. It is full of surprises. It is unpredictable. It is unexpected. And it is undeserved grace. Jesus made up this story because he wanted us to understand the heart of God. Now, if you looked carefully at the advertising material for tonight, you would have seen that I gave a title to this evening, and I called it Unfair Grace. Now, that title was intended to tease you, because unfair grace, those two words put together, are an oxymoron. They cancel one another out. An oxymoron is something like jumbo shrimp. Those are two words that are opposite to one another. Some say that government organization is an oxymoron. The one that I love to see, sometimes you pass by a pub, and in the window it says function room, free hire. And I say, you can't say free hire. If you hire it, you pay for it, and if it's free, you don't hire it. They would have to say available free. Now come on, unfair grace. Those two words can never fit together. And the reason that they cannot fit together is because there is no such thing as fair grace. No such thing. Grace by its very nature cannot be deserved or earned. It is what we receive. If what we receive has been earned, then it is merit or deserts or reward or remuneration. Grace is what we can never earn and never deserve. And because it is undeserved, it's also unexpected. In this parable, all of the participants are gobsmacked at what the owner of the vineyard does. The servants are gobsmacked. They would have paid everybody according to the hours that they worked. The workers expected different wages from one another according to the number of hours that they worked. But Jesus organized the story so that they would see the way in which the Master runs his kingdom. Now, here is a deep, deep point. I want you to step into the parable with me. Just do that with your imagination. Step into the parable. Identify yourself as one of those men who worked for 12 hours. And you went home, you'd got your denarius, but you grumbled all the way. When you got home, you told your wife, and you grumbled to her. You got the children around the table, and they had a meal, and you grumbled to them. And you grumbled to your neighbors, and the next morning when you went back and you stood on the street, you grumbled to everybody else that was on the street corner. So you're one of the grumblers. A week goes by, and you get work every day. It's wonderful. You have one of those beautiful passages where work comes and the money's there and the children are fed. The following week, here you are on the street. You're there at 6 o'clock in the morning and nobody takes you on. And the hours are going by and the sun is overhead and you realize that the middle of the day has come and nobody has taken you on. The sun is beginning to move through the sky. And you realize that by this stage you're into the middle of the afternoon and your expectation of getting work has gone through the floor. And you think to yourself, I might just as well go home. And then to the street comes the owner of the vineyard. And he sees you. And he says to you, I'd like you to come and work in my vineyard, please. And you say, I'm ready, thank you for the work. When you go and work for him, you've started at the 9th hour or maybe the 11th hour of the day, and as you work for him, you are hoping that he will be the same to you as he was to those other men last week. Will you not? For the hour that you work or the 3 hours that you work, you will be saying to yourself, I hope that he's generous today. I hope that he's compassionate today. I hope that he cares about my children today. I hope that he's going to be good to me today. That's what you'll do. And when it comes to the time that you are paid off, you look to see whether or not you're going to get a denarius, even though you've just worked for an hour or 2 or 3. You and I are dependent upon grace, upon grace, upon grace. I became a Christian 60 years ago next month, and I have needed that grace. Ever since then, again and again and again and again, I've had to go back for that grace. Again and again, I have got to count on it, that the compassion is going to be there, and the forgiveness is going to be there, and the hand to lift me up, and the care for my life and my wife and my children is going to be there. And I live on that. I depend upon it. I long for it. That is the God that Jesus proclaimed. Isn't he wonderful? To be restored in our faith again, to be welcomed back again, to make a new start after having fallen again, to have his forgiveness again. It wasn't just a one-off. It is repeatable. And here's the Jesus that we want to belong to. Gracious and compassionate. He's the one who wants to give back to us self-respect and dignity, and to give us a hope and a future. He wants to encourage us, show us compassion, grace, and goodness. It is completely unfair. I shouldn't have it, but he gives it to me out of the goodness of his heart. It is grace. This is a God of compassion. This is a God of double grace. But it is also a God to be proclaimed to the world. What's the reason that Jesus has told this parable story? It has a context. Last night we looked in detail at the context and hardly gave any time to the parable. This evening we've given a lot of time to the parable, not much to the context. What was the context? We've left everything to follow you, said Peter. It's verse 27 of the previous chapter. We've left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us? And Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or fathers or mothers or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. What's the context of this parable? There are many who have made sacrifices for him, for his kingdom and for his cause, and they will receive back, says Jesus, 100 times as much. And then he tells this parable. And why does he tell this parable? He tells this parable because he wants our eyes to be upon the rewarder and not upon the reward. There is something of immense importance here. Jesus is describing here the system that he operates in the kingdom of heaven, and it is fundamentally different from the system which is in operation here upon the earth. This is how it works. The one who has been a Christian for a day and the one who has been a Christian for a lifetime will both experience the gates of heaven opening wide for them. And that is as it should be. There'll be no difference in the welcome that they receive, no difference in their eternal destiny, no substandard heaven for those who believe at the last minute. And that is just the way that we would want it to be too. And this is the fabulous message of Jesus Christ, to proclaim to those who may be close to or even upon their deathbed, we can offer hope. We can offer hope. The Master is good. He is gracious. He is generous beyond words. Come at the 11th hour. If we needed any evidence, we've got it here in the Bible itself. We only need to look at the thief on the cross next to Jesus. He was the man who heard these extraordinary words at the 11th hour and the 59th minute. Today you will be with me in paradise. The first man to enter heaven after Jesus' crucifixion was a justly convicted and guilty criminal who had believed for less than an hour or two. Those of us who have been in the pastoral ministry over the years know what it is like to offer Jesus to dying men and women. One man, I went to visit him in the A&E department of Brongleis Hospital in Aberystwyth. And as I went into the cubicle where he was, he looked up at me from his pillow and he said, "I'm dying." There was a man who had been difficult in his marriage, engineered the end of his marriage. He painted the word freedom on a sheet and he hung it outside his house when the decree absolute came through. I sat at his bedside and I taught him the prayer of a dying man. This is what we've got to offer. We've got a Jesus who is filled with compassion, generosity and care and love to the very last minute. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's the prayer. Just say that prayer. Let your life be flooded with the presence of Jesus. Go to meet him. This is the glory of the Christian message. You know, of course, side by side with that, you will have heard the warning that goes along with this. Don't count on the 11th hour, because one thief on the cross was saved that none should despair, but only one that none should presume. But this is what we are able to do, is to take hope to dying people and invite them to embrace the Master. This parable tells of a God of compassion. It tells us of a God of double grace. It tells us of a God to be proclaimed. But it also tells us of a God of the unexpected. This vineyard owner completely blindsides us with the things that he does. He goes out himself to find the workmen. He instructs that they should be paid in reverse order. He shouldn't do that. And then he instructs that everybody gets the same. We're surprised, surprised, surprised. It is all an unexpected story. And the result is that you never can quite predict what the Lord will do. Where grace might crop up. Who will be the next person to receive it? Yes, the Lord is entirely trustworthy. He keeps his promises. He can be relied upon. We take them from the scriptures and we believe them. He's not a man that he should lie, but repeatedly he does these things that are unexpected and surprising. Let me take you out of the parable for a moment and take you to a little bit of early Christian history. So we go together to Acts chapter 12. Listen to what happens. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the feast of unleavened bread. Now, Jesus had 12 disciples. 3 of them were particularly close. It was Peter, James, and John. James and John were brothers. So here, in the early years of the new church, King Herod had James arrested. The plan was to execute him as soon as possible, and he did, executed with a sword. It was a popular move with the hierarchy, and so it was so popular that he then imprisoned Peter, with the intention of doing exactly the same to him. And then the rest of chapter 12 in the Acts of the Apostles describes for us the miraculous release of Peter from prison. It happens at night, and an angel comes in order to do it. As he stands up, the chains fall off Peter's wrist. He and the angel walk past the first guard and the second guard. When they get to the outer gate opens of its own accord. Now, this was extraordinary. It was miraculous. It was completely unpredictable and completely unexpected. Now then, why the difference? Why was James allowed to be beheaded And why was Peter set free? Answers in a very lengthy book by the end of the evening, please. Can you answer that? Why wasn't one allowed to be murdered and the other saved? Was Peter more valuable than James? Perhaps James was more sinful and Peter more righteous. Now, obviously not. The answer to the question, let me give it to you simply in one word. Mysterious. I have no idea. I'm not here to explain God. God can explain himself. I'm here to preach him. Come with me to the old city of Jerusalem, the Jewish quarter. You walk down, and there on the right-hand side is the blue and white gallery, and it's run by Udi Marriott. You go in and he will explain to you that some years ago he developed a neurological condition, and over a period of 5 years his condition got worse until he was confined to a wheelchair. He had to be carried in and out of the toilet, and some Christians heard about his condition. He was a Jewish man. He's a Jewish man by descent. Some Christians heard about his condition and went to pray for him. From the day that they prayed for him, healing began, and within 3 weeks he was back in his studio at work. And the hospitals in Jerusalem call him the miracle man, Udi Marriott. Now, is that grace? That's grace. That is grace in capital letters. But it's unfair grace, you see, because he wasn't even a Christian. He is now. But then you come with me to visit my other friend, Alan. Alan was a lifelong wheelchair user, even though he was a lifelong believer. And he died prematurely, did Alan. If I was to ask Alan, would you like it to be you or Udi that got up out of the wheelchair? I'll tell you what Alan would say. Give it to Udi. That's what he'd say. Because he shares the heart of Jesus. Because he wants people to experience grace. Come with me to Nepal. Some years ago, we had the opportunity to minister in Nepal, and we were sitting down at lunchtime with some members of the Nepali Christian Fellowship. And there was one of the finance officers who was there at the table, and we were introduced to him, and his name's Buddha. Well, I've never met a Christian with the name Buddha before, so I had to have an explanation, didn't I? He obviously wasn't from a Christian family. No Christian parent would call their son Buddha. So I said to him, Buddha, tell me your story. He said, my mother had a hemorrhage. It was severe and continuous, and she went to the doctors, and they could do nothing for her. She went back again and again. She also went to all of the temples of all of the gods that she could possibly go and see, and took them votive offerings. And she didn't get any better. And somebody said to her, why don't you go to the Christians? They pray for the sick. And she did. She was healed. Now that's unfair grace because she was a Hindu. But not anymore. And nor's her son Buddha. But then, there's our friend Hilary from church. Hilary's a strong Christian woman. Leader of the Sunday school, marvelous with children, an influential testimony, a mature, godly woman. We prayed and fasted for Hilary, and she died. But if we had said to Hilary, Hilary, would you like it to be you, or would you like it to be Buddha's mother? Hilary would have said, give the grace away. Give the grace away. I want her to have it. That's love. That's compassion. He is the master, and he's giving the grace away to anybody who'll receive it. Jesus preached unexpected grace. He preached surprising grace. He preached inexplicable grace. He preached the oxymoron, undeserved grace. It's all undeserved. Some are healed miraculously, and some are not. Why don't we see tonight what the Lord would do? Unexpected, inexplicable, surprising. Where are we tonight? We're in the house of God. Where are we tonight? We're amongst the people of God. Where are we? Tonight we're amongst people who believe in the power of God. Why do we not invite him to be at work amongst us? Just a few years ago, you know, the clergy, they have meetings together in little groups. They call them deanery. Do you still have deaneries in it? Yeah, deaneries. So the clergy got together. And one of the clergy, he was comparatively new to the area. His name was Stephen Edwards. And he was presiding at the communion. And it came time for the intercessions. And we prayed our prayers for the sick and suffering. And then it came time for the administration of communion. And he said to his fellow clergy, he said, this morning, if you need a miracle, after you've received communion, stay at the communion rail and I'll pray for you. And we nearly fell off our seats. A clergyman talking about if you would like a miracle, please come here, we'll lay hands on you and pray for you. Stephen, what a boy. What a boy. Do you like a miracle tonight? Do you need a miracle tonight? I have no idea what God will do. Absolutely none whatsoever. He does the unexpected. He does the unpredictable. He does the surprising. And he does the undeserved. Do you deserve a miracle? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Sorry to tell you, there are no qualifications for receiving one. But come. Come. And let's see what God will do. Why not? We're the people of God. For his Spirit to be free, for us to be filled with faith, and simply to ask. Bishop David has kindly agreed that as the service concludes, and we're going to conclude just in a very few minutes, that he and I will stand together here and we will anoint with oil on the forehead anybody that presents themselves for prayer. So if you would like to be prayed for any kind of miracle at all that God might be at work in your life, whether it is for physical healing or emotional healing or for somebody else that you're longing to see something work in their lives, then will you come down the center aisle? So if you're anywhere on the sides, go to the side and around and come down the center. If you're upstairs, again, come down the center. We will simply anoint you here. That's all we will do. And then you'll go either to this side or to that side, and somebody else will pray with you for as long as it's necessary. And then you go back to your seat, or if it's a long time, you go home. A moment of pray, and I'm going to ask the worship group to come back and to lead us. I'm sure that it'll be gentle. I hope that it will. If it isn't gentle, then perhaps those that control the volume will switch it down and not switch them off. Let's be generous. We love them and appreciate them so much, but just switch them down a little bit so that we're not overwhelmed at the front. So just a prayer together. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Thank you for your grace. Oh, thank you for the grace that has reached my soul. Oh, Lord. And all of us would say amen to that, amen to that, amen to that. Your grace has reached our soul. Have your way, Lord Jesus. If you want to do the unexpected, the unpredictable, the surprising, the undeserved amongst us this evening, we say to you, we're receptive, we desire it, we're asking for it, we seek it. Lord, please, please, please. please. And so that's what we'll do. No histrionics, just those that are going to lead us in worship, if you'll please do that. And let us as a congregation stand. We'll allow people to slip by us. Please do that without embarrassment and make it easy for them to get out. And as you come from the front, so we will anoint you.